it's Allie and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in January. But before we get started on that, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my ranking system. So if I give a book 5 stars, I absolutely loved it. It was a fantastic book. If I gave it 4 stars, it was a great book. If I gave it 3 stars, it was pretty middle of the road. It wasn't fantastic, but it wasn't bad either. And if I gave it 2 stars, it was just all right. It could have been better. It wasn't the greatest book. And if I gave it 1 star, it was not a good book at all. I did not like it. So I read 10 books in total this past month. 9 of them were novels and 1 was a novella, which is just a short story that is part of a series. So today, while I'm talking about these books, I'll talk about them in order of how I read them this past month. So first up is House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig. This book is a 12 Dancing Princesses retelling, and the main character in this book is Annalay, and she is trying to solve the mystery of her sisters who keep dying. Now the townspeople believe that this family is cursed, and Annalay is starting to wonder if that is the case. So going into this book, I knew it was a 12 Dancing Princesses retelling, and I obviously knew that the sisters kept dying and it was kind of a darker book, but I was pleasantly surprised to find out that not only is it a YA fantasy, but it also is a horror story. Now, I am not a huge fan of horror, but I found this book so appealing and it kept my attention the entire time. Now, in the middle of the book, I will admit that I got a little confused at some points. There was so much going on in the story. For example, in the middle of the book, there was so many big events happening, and all of a sudden they just threw in a cute boy because why not? I don't know that that necessarily needed to be a part of the story, but it kind of gave us more insight into our protagonist, Annalay. By the end, they wrapped it all up, and it had such a great ending. I gave House of Salt and Sorrows 5 out of 5 stars. It was so good. I would definitely probably read it again, and I would suggest it for a spooky Halloween read. Next up, I have Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. So I had high hopes going into this book. I had heard so many great things about it, and I was a little disappointed with the outcome of this book. The writing wasn't typically what I like to read. It wasn't very descriptive. And like I said in my reading vlog, that's just my personal preference. The book throughout was just kind of boring to me. I did enjoy the ending of the book, but just the story as a whole, I wasn't real interested in it. So this book follows Dante and Aristotle, and they are 2 teenage boys, and they become the most unlikely of friends. They're very different, but that has drawn them to each other. And so it just kind of gives me a different point of view because it's from the perspective of 2 teenage boys. And I obviously did not grow up with that kind of perspective. So I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. The writing was good, it just wasn't my taste in writing. Next, I have To Kill a Kingdom by Alexandra Christo. And To Kill a Kingdom is a Little Mermaid retelling with a dark twist to it. Now we follow Lyra, who is a siren, and every year on the month of her birthday, she kills a prince and takes his heart. And this year she took the heart too early and made the Sea Queen mad and then killed one of her own. And so the Sea Queen sent her up on land and told her the only way that she could return to the sea is if she kills the Prince of Midas and brings his heart back. Now the Prince of Midas is not just a prince. He is a pirate prince who hunts sirens. So it's very interesting, and Lyra has to learn how to be in her new human body, which she doesn't have the powers and abilities that she had as a siren. And she goes on this quest with the pirate prince. So it is very different from the Little Mermaid story that we know from Disney, but it might be more original to the very first Little Mermaid story before Disney took that story and made it into the one that most of us know. I absolutely loved this book. It was so interesting. I loved the mermaids and the sirens and the pirates and the princes. I loved how it kind of followed the Little Mermaid story, but it was darker, but we still had that romance in there. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. The only reason I did not give it 5 out of 5 was because there was something at the end of the story that just didn't quite make sense on how they got from point A to point B. I wish that there was a little bit more detail in there on how they ended up getting to that resolution. Next, I read Queen Song by Victoria Aveyard, which is a YA fantasy novella. It is the novella to the Red Queen series. And if you don't know what the Red Queen series, it is about a group of 2 people, and one group of people have red blood and one group of people have silver blood. The people with silver blood have special abilities, and this dystopian world is ruled by a monarchy of people with these silver abilities. Now, the red people in this world are treated not very well, and our protagonist, Mare, finds herself thrown into this silver world, and she tries to make the world better for all the red-blooded people. Now, Queen Song is about the prince of this dystopian world. It's about his mother, who passed away before the first book in the Red Queen series. His mother had the ability of song. She could look into someone's eyes and tell them exactly what she wanted them to do. Now, I will say for Queen Song, there's a trigger warning for suicide, so if you are sensitive to that, I would not pick this book up. But Queen Song follows our protagonist as she comes from a family that is not very rich in this silver world, and she falls in love with the prince and marries him. Then she has their son, Cal. But throughout this story, we learn that this queen is not very happy in this world, and she's kind of been depressed most of her life. So it basically is the background of Cal, and it's kind of interesting to read because Cal is a main character in the Red Queen series, and we don't hear a lot about his mom, who he doesn't remember because she died so young. So I enjoyed getting to know a little bit more about her. Now, I gave this story 3 out of 5 stars. I gave it 3 stars just because I finally got to understand a little bit more about Cal's mom, but it wasn't overly intriguing. There wasn't anything that was super surprising in this story. So that's why I only gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Next, I read The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. Now, this book follows Star, and she is a black girl that goes to a white privileged school, but she lives in a poor black neighborhood. Now, one night while she was in the neighborhood, she went to a party and she left with her childhood friend. And on their ride home, her childhood friend was murdered by a police officer. And this whole book follows Star as she grieves and as she tries to handle this very difficult situation between her 2 worlds. Now, I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. It was a book that I think that almost everyone needs to read because it is very relevant to what is going on in America right now. It was very sad. It was very hard to read for me. I think I put it down 2 or 3 times and went to a lighter read just because with how I've been feeling lately, I just needed something more lighthearted. But just because I stopped reading it does not mean that it wasn't a great book. It was fantastic. And I ended up going back to it and I finished it, but it was definitely a heavy read. By page 24, I was already crying. It's just a very difficult read, but well worth it. I think it's something that gives someone like me who is a white privileged reader another view on life and what goes on for people and what they have to experience. Next, I have Buried Beneath a Baobab Tree, and this is about the events that happened in 2014 in Nigeria when Boko Haram kidnapped 276 girls. This is a fiction novel, so it has a little bit more to it than just the facts, but it is based on the real events that happened during that time. This was very eye-opening to me. Like I said before, I'm not good on keeping up with global current events. So when I read this, it almost to me felt like I was reading something that should have happened several years ago. I could not believe that this was happening in our time, that these girls were going through this horrific event. If you don't know who Boko Haram is, he was a Muslim terrorist who believed that no girl should have any education and that education was evil. And he would take these girls of all belief systems and he would try to change them into what he believed a Muslim woman should be. So this book follows a character who is a Christian girl and she has no option but to become Muslim in his care. But it also talks about some of the girls that were kidnapped who were already Muslim and how Boko Haram's version of Allah and his beliefs didn't line up with what they believed Muslim to be. Before writing this book, the author went around and interviewed the girls that were found, and the families of the girls that were still missing to get further information on them. I gave this book 3 out of 5 stars. I thought that it was very informative of what was going on, and I enjoyed the basis of the story. But with it being a fiction novel and not a nonfiction, I kind of wish there was more to the story. The book in here has very short chapters. You can see this is one chapter here, and there's just not much information in there. It would seem like you would read a chapter and you would start getting into it, and then all of a sudden it would completely change. So I wish with this book that I could have learned more about how they felt to get even more of a feel of what was going on. Next, I read the original trilogy in the Selection series, which was the Selection, the Elite, and the One, all by Kiera Cass. In this story, it's a dystopian world where 35 girls are selected to vie for the prince's hand. When I started reading the Selection, it was really good. It was very intriguing. It was a quick, fast read, but it was very predictable at times. I gave the first book 4 out of 5 stars. But then I went to read The Elite, and oh my goodness, it got so much better. I could not put the book down. As soon as I finished it, I picked up the one and I went through that. I think I read the last 2 books in 2 days. They were so good. I gave both of them 5 out of 5 stars. This series is definitely a pleasure read. It's one of those series that you're just not going to get a whole lot out of it, though it's very interesting to learn about the caste systems that is in this series. And America, who is the main character in this book, tries to go through and tries to stand up for the people in the lower caste who kind of get forgotten about and put on the wayside. Now, there were 2 books added to the original trilogy, so there's 2 additional books, and they are about America's daughter. But I've heard mixed reviews on them. I've heard some people say that the character isn't very likable and that the books aren't as good as the first 3 books in the original trilogy. So I'm not sure if I will ever end up picking those up. At the end of the last book, I felt like I didn't want to give up the characters in the book. It was so good. I was so attached to the characters. Throughout the whole story, I was laughing and crying and smiling. It's just one of those things that you can be completely immersed in the story. So just for that reason, I might pick up the next 2 just to get back into the world and see what happened to the characters that I fell in love with. Next, I have The Wife Upstairs by Rachel Hawkins, and this was a new release last month. This book is a modern-day Jane Eyre retelling. This follows our main character, who is our plain Jane, who has a relationship with a well-off man. Now, I was really excited to get into this book. Jane Eyre is my favorite classic. It's been a long time since I've read it. I think I read it in like 8th grade, so I definitely need to do a reread of it. So I had really high hopes going into this story. And to start off, I was the first few chapters, I was very hesitant of the book. I wasn't sure how it was going to end up. And I ended up not liking this a whole lot. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars because it was still surprising in some spots. And it wasn't a bad story. It was a good story. But I think because I love Jane Eyre so much, I had expected the characters to be a little bit more similar to Jane Eyre. But our main character in here, Jane, she's just not a very likable character. She steals from other people, and she is a gold digger. She goes to a neighborhood just to be able to find someone so that she can live there and live that life. So she doesn't even really love Eddie. She's just with him because of his money. Maybe if I hadn't read Jane Eyre before going into this, I might have liked this book a little bit more. But that just wasn't the case. So those are all the books that I read in January. If you've read any of them, please comment down below and let me know your thoughts on those books. I also read some children's books this past month, and I might post a video specifically for those children's books. Let me know if you'd be interested in that. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon if you want to be notified when I post new content. All my social media accounts will be linked down below, and all the books will be linked down below that I talked about in this video as well on Amazon if you wanted to check those out. Thank you so much for watching my video. I'll see you next time. Bye.